the annals of history are marked by men like Vladimir Putin, individuals who rally their nations under the banner of nationalism and stoke the fires of war with their neighbors, or even entire continents. However, such figures driven by dark ambitions inevitably meet their downfall. These downfalls typically occur during the most intense conflicts they ignite. The 20th century bore witness to the downfall of figures like Hitler and Mussolini. The 19th century, meanwhile, was marked by the end of Napoleon Bonaparte's reign. The reigns of these infamous dictators concluded amidst the fiercest conflicts they launched, as did their turbulent lives. Today, Putin has initiated his own series of military confrontations. Interestingly, while the past 2 centuries saw ambitious men moving towards Russia, this modern czar is expanding his reign beyond Russia's borders, reminiscent of the czars who previously expanded Russia across millions of miles. However, this modern czar is confronted with formidable challenges: the resilience of Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky, a powerful and unprecedented military alliance, and the combined economic might of Europe and the United States. Yet, one must not underestimate Putin. His past as a former KGB member and his enduring reign, spanning over 2 decades, attest to his strategic acumen and tenacity. This savvy czar may seem a step ahead of today's world leaders. Many believe that the ongoing conflict with Ukraine will unfold according to his carefully orchestrated design. But the pertinent question remains, what is his endgame in this escalating geopolitical scenario? As we delve into this analysis, we'll attempt to decode Putin's strategic maneuvers amidst the complexities of the current Ukraine crisis.
His end game for failure is that Ukraine is left in a smoking ruin. Oh, that's a victory. So then he can lose with impunity.
Right.
So how can we win? We can't win against Vladimir Putin anyways, because you cannot win against someone you cannot say no to.
Russia-Ukraine conflict has its origins deeply embedded in the region's complex and intertwined history. The East Slavic people, forming one of the 3 major branches of the Slavic ethnic and linguistic family, have played a crucial role in shaping the cultural, political, and territorial landscape of Eastern Europe. They share a common language known as the East Slavic language, which evolved into 3 distinct languages: Russian, Ukrainian, and Belarusian. These languages are closely related and share a significant degree of mutual intelligibility. The region of Ukraine, particularly the city of Kyiv, played a crucial role in the early history of the East Slavic people. The medieval state of Kievan Rus, centered around the city of Kyiv, emerged as a powerful and influential entity in the 9th to 13th centuries. Kievan Rus served as a precursor to modern Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine, and its leadership held prestigious titles like Grand Prince of Kyiv and Prince of Novgorod. As Kievan Rus gradually disintegrated, power shifted to various principalities, and the city of Moscow emerged as a significant center of influence. The rulers of Moscow, including Ivan IV, sought legitimacy from the heritage of Kievan Rus, contributing to the formation of the future Russian state. In the late 18th century, Ukraine experienced significant territorial changes as it was divided between the Russian Empire and the Habsburg monarchy, leading to the emergence of distinct Ukrainian identities under the influence of the respective imperial spheres. The 20th century saw dramatic shifts in Ukraine's political landscape. Following the Russian Revolution and the subsequent Civil War, Ukraine became one of the founding republics of the Soviet Union in 1922. Throughout this period, Ukrainian national identity faced complex dynamics, with elements of fostering and suppression under Soviet policies. One of the darkest chapters in Ukrainian history was the Holodomor, a devastating famine in the early 1930s caused by forced collectivization and grain requisition policies implemented by the Soviet government. The Holodomor left an indelible mark on the Ukrainian psyche and remains a sensitive issue in Ukraine-Russia relations. World War II brought immense suffering to Ukraine as parts of the country were occupied by Nazi Germany. Some Ukrainians collaborated with the Nazis, while others joined the Soviet Red Army to fight against the invaders. This period added further complexity to historical narratives and memories within Ukraine. The dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991 granted Ukraine its independence, but the transition to statehood was challenging, marked by political instability, economic difficulties, and debates over language policies, particularly regarding the status of the Russian language. One of the most contentious issues in Ukraine's post-Soviet history has been the status of Crimea. In 1954, the Soviet government transferred Crimea from the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic to the Ukrainian SSR. After the fall of the Soviet Union, Crimea remained part of an independent Ukraine until events in 2014. In late 2013, widespread protests known as Euromaidan erupted in Kyiv, demanding closer ties with the European Union and an end to corruption. These protests culminated in the ousting of the pro-Russian president Viktor Yanukovych in February 2014. Russia perceived these events as a threat to its interest in Ukraine and subsequently annexed Crimea, citing the need to protect Russian speakers and Crimea's historical ties to Russia.
Of course, Soviet rule created Soviet Ukraine. It is a well-known fact. No Ukraine existed in the history of humankind until then.
Additionally, Russia supported separatist movements in the eastern Ukrainian regions of Donetsk and Luhansk, leading to an ongoing conflict that continues to impact Ukraine's stability and international relations. Ukraine and much of the international community have refused to recognize Russia's annexation of Crimea, considering it a clear violation of international law. The conflict between Russia and Ukraine has deep-rooted geopolitical connotations. Following Ukraine's independence from the Soviet Union in 1991, the country pursued closer ties with the West, seeking integration with the European Union and NATO. This geopolitical shift was viewed with concern by Moscow, as it perceived Ukraine's pro-Western orientation as a challenge to Russia's security interests. The expansion of NATO towards Russia's borders, including the possibility of Ukraine's membership, led to heightened tensions and security concerns from the Russian perspective. The 2008 Bucharest summit further exacerbated these geopolitical tensions.
I don't think anyone in the 1990s, the late 90s, anticipated that the Putin they knew then would become the Putin we know now.
NATO's final declaration stated its willingness to consider Ukraine and Georgia's aspirations for Euro-Atlantic integration. In response, President Vladimir Putin explicitly expressed his opposition to this development, terming the declaration a direct threat to Russia. This discontent with NATO's expansion laid the groundwork for escalated tensions between Russia and Georgia, culminating in a full-blown conflict with territorial changes in favor of Russia. President Putin's foreign policy approach is marked by aspirations to restore Russia's prominence as a great power on the global stage. He often emphasizes the concept of the Russian world, Ruski Mir, underscoring shared cultural and historical ties between Russia and other countries that were once part of the Soviet Union.
From his perspective, he's been successful at home. He's built the economy compared to what it was in the 90s. And he's not afraid of war. This is his fifth war. Fifth war. Chechnya 2000, Georgia 2008, Ukraine 2014, Syria 2015.
Moreover, Putin cites Russia's special responsibility to protect Russians and Russian speakers living beyond its borders. This perspective was evident during the 2008 Russia-Georgia conflict, where concerns about safeguarding Russian-speaking populations were cited as a pretext for Russia's military intervention in Georgia. Ukraine was next! The annexation of Crimea in 2014 was justified as a means of protecting the Russian-speaking population in the region from perceived threats posed by the Ukrainian government. Similarly, in 2022, Russia cited the protection of Russian-speaking people in the Donbas region of Ukraine as a rationale for its involvement in the ongoing conflict there. Recently, Putin said this about another of its neighboring countries. Belarus is part of the Union state, and launching an aggression against Belarus would mean launching an aggression against the Russian Federation. We will respond to that with all the resources available to us. Putin's consistent opposition to Ukraine's potential NATO membership is rooted in his belief that such a development would undermine Russia's security. He views NATO as a hostile military alliance and fears that Ukraine's integration could lead to the deployment of NATO troops and weapons closer to Russia's borders. This concern has driven Russia's resistance to Ukraine's Western alignment, as it seeks to maintain influence over its neighboring countries. The conflict between Russia and Ukraine, as well as Russia's actions in other regions with sizable Russian-speaking populations, reflects a larger geopolitical strategy aimed at Russia's ever-expanding sphere of influence. In the context of present-day conflict and escalation in Ukraine, it is noteworthy that Moscow's demands, articulated prior to the invasion, centered around compelling Ukraine to declare neutrality and abandon its NATO aspirations, demilitarize and disarm, recognize Crimea as part of Russia, and acknowledge the independence of the self-proclaimed Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics.
Обеспечить безопасные условия для проведения референдумов, для того, чтобы люди могли выразить свою волю. И то решение о своем будущем, которое примет большинство жителей Донецкой и Луганской народных республик, Запорожской и Херсонской областей, мы поддержим.
The language of the declaration, which explicitly warned of appropriate military technical measures in case of non-compliance, garnered significant international criticism as many countries perceived it as an attempt by Russia to exert influence and undermine Ukraine's sovereignty. Consequently, the Ukrainian government firmly rejected these demands, considering them unacceptable and a direct threat to its territorial integrity and national independence. The subsequent Russian invasion of Ukraine resulted in initial victories for Russia, but Ukrainian forces, backed by their Western allies, displayed resilient resistance, leading to a protracted and evolving conflict that has assumed a hybrid nature, blending conventional military actions with non-standard tactics and strategies. This limited yet complex battle is characterized by information warfare, where all parties involved are actively shaping public perceptions and narratives to advance their interests and agendas. The involvement of both Russia and the West reflects their vested interests, with Russia seeking to assert its dominance and challenge the United States' credibility in safeguarding its allies, while the US and its allies strive to uphold the rules-based order and support Ukraine's resistance against Russian aggression. The conflict's trajectory remains uncertain, with ongoing skirmishes and retaliatory actions escalating tensions and further complicating the geopolitical landscape in the region. The recent escalation in hostilities was triggered by an attack by Ukrainian forces on the Crimean Bridge, a crucial supply line for Russian forces fighting in southern Ukraine. In response, Russia's defense ministry claims to have retaliated by striking sites in Odessa, but this claim is contested by Ukraine, which insists that its forces successfully neutralized numerous Russian drones and cruise missiles aimed at the Black Sea port. Amidst these tit-for-tat attacks, the front lines of the conflict have been described as dynamically changing multiple times a day. Russia's military continues its offensive operations, while Ukraine has launched a counteroffensive to recapture territory. The Kremlin has accused Kyiv of using a maritime corridor formerly used for exporting Ukrainian grain for military purposes, which adds an economic dimension to the geopolitical conflict. While military power and resources are crucial in any conflict, the war in Ukraine is being fought with restraint, with all parties wary of uncontrolled escalation. The West, in particular, seeks to contain the conflict within Ukraine's borders, avoiding direct confrontation with Russia. Russia, on the other hand, avoids a direct war with NATO, understanding that such a conflict cannot be won.
Oh, I think there was a considerable evolution in Putin in some ways over that period of time, particularly since the Orange Revolution in Ukraine in 2004, which I think Putin saw as a direct threat to his own control in Russia.
The involvement of private military companies, PMCs, in the conflict in Ukraine has introduced complexities and raised serious implications. PMCs, such as the Wagner Group and other private mercenaries, have increased fighting capabilities on both sides, intensifying the conflict and hindering peaceful resolutions. Accountability challenges arise as PMCs often operate outside the traditional rules of engagement, leading to human rights abuses and difficulties in holding them accountable. Moreover, their presence can facilitate weapons smuggling, undermining efforts to control arms proliferation. This development adds another layer of complexity to the geopolitical scenario. On a global scale, the war is causing significant concern. The United Nations has condemned the conflict, with Undersecretary General Rosemary DiCarlo describing life in Ukraine as a living hell. The disruption of Ukraine's grain export corridor could have far-reaching implications for global food supplies, affecting millions of people worldwide. Ukraine is one of the world's largest grain exporters, particularly of wheat and corn, and plays a critical role in the global food supply chain. According to reports, Russian missile attacks have targeted Ukraine's Black Sea coast, destroying 60,000 tons of grain and damaging significant grain storage infrastructure. This is significant because Russia has reportedly pulled out of an international agreement that guaranteed safe passage for exports across the Black Sea. The destruction of these ports and grain storage facilities could significantly impede Ukraine's grain exports, causing global food shortages.
Росія цілеспрямовано б'є по цивільній інфраструктурі, по житловим районам, по нашим портам.
Leading international relations experts provide deeper insights into these developments. Dr. Fiona Hill, a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution and a former U.S. National Security Council official, argues that Putin views Russia as being in an ongoing war with the West, with Ukraine being another theater in this war. Professor John J. Mearsheimer from the University of Chicago suggests that Putin perceives Ukraine's potential inclusion into Western institutions like NATO and the EU as an unacceptable security threat. Angela Stent from Georgetown University underscores Putin's desire to re-establish Russia as a great power, which includes exerting influence over countries like Ukraine.
Нашлась копия карты.
We found a copy of a map from the 17th century, created during the time of Louis XIV. In the middle of the 17th, in the second half of the 17th century, created by the French themselves. Why did I bring it? Vladimir Vladimirovich. It has no Ukraine.
Predicting the outcomes isn't straightforward. Professor Alexander Cooley from the Harriman Institute warns against underestimating the Ukrainian resistance or the potential international backlash. As Professor Kimberly Martin of Barnard College notes, the outcomes depend on a multi-dimensional chess game involving regional, international, and domestic players. As the conflict enters its second year, the likely endgame is challenging to predict definitively. The stalemate on the ground suggests that neither side is close to achieving its objectives fully. Putin's original hopes of a quick and decisive victory have given way to a war of attrition, which could continue for years to come. A comprehensive Russian defeat, including the complete expulsion of Russian forces from all occupied territories, seems unlikely, just as an all-out Russian takeover of Ukraine is improbable. A political solution may eventually become necessary to end the conflict, possibly resulting in an armistice or an informal line of separation. Russia will likely seek to consolidate its hold on strategic territories while allowing Ukraine to retain some semblance of sovereignty. The U.S. and its allies, meanwhile, will aim to ensure Ukraine's territorial integrity and resist further Russian aggression. The West's commitment to Ukraine will be critical in determining how the conflict evolves. To conclude, understanding Putin's endgame in Ukraine is a daunting task. It is a deeply complex issue, influenced by a mix of historical, geopolitical, security, economic, and domestic factors.
No, Putin, I think, is a very complicated personality. I think he lives in a world in which, the tough get to set the rules and the weak get taken advantage of. He's a cynic about people around him and sometimes about his own population as well. Control is what he attaches the most importance to.
Predicting this endgame is challenging, with potential implications extending beyond Russia and Ukraine, affecting the broader international community and global food security. Just like the notorious leaders of the past 2 centuries, Putin's ambitions may be vast, but he is faced with formidable opposition. As this modern-day czar continues his military campaign, the world watches with bated breath. It waits to see if history will repeat itself, resulting in the downfall of another ambitious leader at the height of the conflict he instigated. Thank you for tuning into this analysis. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more in-depth coverage and scrutiny of global events. Stay informed, and we'll see you in our next video.